This is a recording for some of the answers for the percentage questions that we looked at on Friday. So the first questions are about numbers of pub licenses in Ireland. So we're looking at this data, and I'm going to freeze the first row, and I'm going to get rid of these years that have no information. And I might even, because I think we only need to look at 18 and 11, might hide these columns, and we'll hide this column as well. So the first question is, bold. First question is the county with the biggest drop between 2011 and 2018 in absolute terms, which sounds more complicated than it should. Simply means what is the difference. Most pubs dropped, most counties rather, had a drop in the number of pub licenses in these 2 years. So we can simply say absolute difference, for example, and we will say Carlo. So if we can get this right for 1, then we'll just apply to the others. We're going to do a sum here to say, well, Carlo had 102, and then we're going to subtract what it had 2018, and I won't do that yet, and so the difference is 8. Right? The difference is, well, from 94 to 102 is 8. You could, if you wanted to go in the other direction, you could say, as somebody remarked in one of the classes, you could say it's minus 8. Okay, the drop is, but I prefer to work with these numbers, so the difference from one to the other is 8. And then if we drag that down, we're going to see the next cell automatically calculates the difference between this number minus that number. And then rather than dragging them down, we can double click and they'll all get applied. So what we want to do now is sort these. As we have the first row fixed, we can sort from Z to A, which will give us the biggest numbers to the smallest numbers. And we can see that Cork had the biggest drop in number of pub licenses between 2011 and 2018, namely 102. And actually down the end, you can see that there are a couple that had minus numbers, which in this case represents increases. So there are 3 counties where numbers actually increased. Okay, so there we go. We know that the county with the biggest drop in pub numbers, pub licenses, was Cork. However, we now have question 2, which is the biggest drop in terms of 2011, which is, okay, Cork has the biggest number, but Cork also has the biggest, far bigger number of pubs than anyone else. So, of course, it was going to have the biggest. What I'd like to know is if we expressed the difference as a percentage, then who would have the biggest decrease? So we want to see this decrease not just as an absolute thing, 102, but what slice of the original figure does 102 represent? And if we can answer that, then we can apply it to all the others, and then we can basically compare all the counties. So what we want to know is what is 102 as a percent of 1010? So the numbers involved here are simply equals 102 divided by 1010, and if you do that, you get, let's not have that, you get this 0.1. Because we've divided this by 1010, we're getting the number expressed for 1, so we need to multiply the whole thing by 100. And before we even get to that point, I'm going to reduce the decimal points because it's a bit confusing. Let's have 2 decimal points. Before we even get to this calculation, we can see that the difference was 102 pubs. Originally, we had 1010. It's essentially a drop of 100. out of an original figure of about 1,000. So we should be able to estimate that the difference is about 10%. And that's what we get with our exact calculation. We can then double click and that will be applied to all the others. And so here we'll say percent difference should really say percent drop because these aren't negative, so it's 10% drop, 11% drop. And then we can sort these as well. Set to A, and we can see that the county with the biggest drop as a percentage of the 2011 was Monaghan. Right? So it might only have had 15, but that's actually almost 14% of the pubs it had back in 2011. So that's how we do that. Then we have pubs in Wales. Which area? Well, let's get rid of Ireland then. And I will leave these sheets in the Google Drive. So if you want to look up what I'm doing here, you can. So which year had the highest average number of pubs per area? Okay, what does that mean? If you look at the Wales pubs, okay, we need to freeze the top row. And so each year we've got a number of pubs for each area. All these different numbers. And so this question is asking for the average number of pubs per area. So that's straightforward. We just say equals and then we write average to get the average function to run, and then it's going to need some information, and we can just tell it I want you to take all these numbers from C2 to C23 and get an average. So it's going to add up all the different numbers of pubs and divide by whatever it is, 22, I think. Yeah. So there we go. We get 131.8. Now, 131.8 is not a very useful figure to be quoting, certainly if you're talking to your readers or whatever. We're much better off saying 132. 132 pubs is something that people can visualize and grasp. So like with the previous example, we have the solution here. This is the average, 132. So you can see some are far below average, some are about average, some are below average, and so on. But the average number of pubs per area in Wales is 132 back in 2001. And so if we drag this across, then it will do the same thing, but for 2002. And we'll see it's 139 was the average number of pubs per area. And then it's probably just enough. She won't work automatically with it because it's not going down. So we need to drag it across all the way up to 2018. And then we get a number for each. And we should put something in here. Average per area. And so how do we find the question was, which year has the highest average number of pubs? So 32, 39, we can just look through them. Looks like it might be 2007. We have 142. Yeah. So 2007 looks like the year with the biggest number on average. Which area has the most pubs in 2018? Okay. Well, that's quite straightforward. We simply sort from Z to A, and we find that it's Cardiff, which is unsurprising. Cardiff has, you can see now because I've moved everything. All right, I'll just delete this line for now. I should have, well, what we could do, which might make a bit more sense, is we could take this information we have here, and we could just paste it into another sheet just for the time being. And of course that paste doesn't work because it's calling references. It's saying what actually says in the cell is add up all the things. So what we need is a paste, but a paste special, where we can say just paste the numbers, okay, not the calculations or anything. And so there we go. Those are the average running from 2001 to 2018, if I recall. So those are the averages. Now, once we've got that kept, we'll get rid of it. So 2018, here we are, and the answer is, no, they're not sorted. We'll sort them again from Z to A, and turns out it's Cardiff has the most pubs in 2018, which is not surprising because Cardiff has the most people. Which brings us to the next question: which area has the most pubs in terms of its population? So we have this other collection of data, and I'm going to do a bit of organizing because I don't think we're going to need the other years. No. So we could duplicate this just to have a copy of the original. And then we could take Wales pubs and just get rid of all of that. Maybe get rid of the area codes as well. Okay. So now we have this. I'm going to freeze the first row so that we can organize them. This is a little bit tricky because we've got to get this population data into the pubs data, but we've got to get them to line up. So let's sort the whole thing by area from A to Z, and let's move this, just click on the column and drag it. So now we have 2018 population, which is an estimate, but that's the best we have, for each area, and the areas are arranged alphabetically. We look at, and these are not, so let's arrange these alphabetically by area, and let's rename this so that we know what we're looking at when we start introducing other data. So that's the number of pubs, this is the population, so let's copy that data, and if we paste it all in, oh, that's the right place. If we paste it all in, then we can double check that we have actually lined up all our different areas, because it would be a bit disastrous if they were out. Okay, so they are all lined up. Everything corresponds correctly. We can delete that, and this can be population. Great. So now what we want to know is, what was the original question? Most pubs in terms of its population. Okay. So if we go to Blaenau Gwent, we've got 35 pubs for 69,713 people. What I'd like to know is how many pubs do we have for one person? So I'm going to divide the 35 by the 69,700, whatever it is, and we're going to get a very small number. Okay, that's how many pubs we have for one person in the area, which is understandable because we've got a huge number of pubs and we've divided, a huge number of people, and we've divided a relatively small number of pubs by all these people, so everyone gets a tiny bit of the pub. Not very helpful like that. However, we can say, well, what about for 100 people? Okay, and now we've got 0.05. So that helps, but 100 people is not really what we want here. 10,000. Let's try it for 10. There we go. So for 10,000 people, so this is the number of pubs per 10,000. And we can reduce these decimal points again. We'll keep some decimal points. And so now, if we apply this, let's see, it'll do the same thing. Down here, it'll divide 80 by 144,876, and then it will multiply it by whatever it was, 10,000. Okay, and so then we can apply this to all of them, and then we can sort it, and we can see that the place with the most pubs for 10,000 people is Pembrokeshire. So Pembrokeshire has almost 13 pubs per 10,000 people. whereas Caerphilly only has just under 6 pubs for 10,000 people. So now there's an alternative way you could do this. You could ask, in what area does one pub serve the fewest people? So that's essentially the same problem, but supposing instead of measuring everything by saying if there were 10,000 people in the area, we could say, well, if there was one pub in the area, what would how many people would it have to serve? So if you have 160 pubs and you have that many people, you simply say, well, we've got this many people divided by 160, and there we go, we have people per pub. Okay, does that make sense? 700, let's reduce this. 782 people for each pub. Okay, that's quite a few people. Does that make sense? If you multiply, for example, the 160 pubs by the 782 people we think, oops, then you get a number that's about the same. So that calculation is correct, and then we can say, so here you're looking for the area where a pub serves the fewest people, and that way you'll see areas with the most pubs. And we'll so Pembrokeshire 782. So why is Merthyr got so fewer people? So where are we? So Pembrokeshire is serving 782 people per pub, and yet so why is that not consistent? Let's see. We would expect Pembrokeshire to have the smallest number of people per pub. Okay, let's see if we've done this. This divided by that, 782. And now where's Caerphilly? Yeah. Okay. Don't know what something obviously went wrong there, because we should be getting almost exactly the same results, because we're measuring the same thing, just measuring it differently. Here we've said, well, how many pubs would you have if you had 10,000 people instead of your actual population? And here we're saying, as things are, if you shared all the people out, divided them up between all the pubs, you'd have 782 in Pembrokeshire. So not that many people, because there are many more pubs. So that's the way around that. Okay, now percentage markup the cash converters wanted to make on a series of goods in 2012. So here we have this data, and there's some points. It needs to be organized and formatted, because as you can see, we can see the numbers, but the machine certainly can't read them. And if we want the calculations to be done by the machine, we have a problem. So the first thing we can do, as is suggested, is to use split text to columns. And so we select the column, and then we go to something to format. Where is it? There it is. Data. So under data we have split text to columns, and that will take the text that's in that column, and we'll split it across different columns depending, and we'll split it on what we tell it to use as a divider. So if you had, for example, your CSV that had turned up in a single column, you could tell it please split everything by the commas, divide things out. And here we should be given a choice, and we can let it detect automatically, which won't work here. Or we could say split everything on semicolons if we had semicolons, but we don't. You could say if you split everything on space, for example, then it will just split. Every time it sees a space, it will put something in a new column. So that's quite useful, but it doesn't quite work for us here. So we'll undo that. What we need to build a custom split, because we want it to split where it finds not just a space, because that's what we did, but a semicolon. Even if we did a semicolon, I have a feeling it wouldn't work. Sorry, if we did a colon. So let's try that. Let's just say a colon. What happens? Nope, that worked. Yep, nothing wrong with that. Okay. And it looks like we have the thing formatted as money. Well, let's try. Let's see if we can just add them up, because if it understands. Yeah, okay, so it's understood that it's money. If the last time I did this, it didn't work so well, and let's see, we could split it again and see if we split, let's see, custom, and this time we do colon space. Okay, that's not working. Oh, that's why it's not working. All right, let's undo some of this. Right, yes, I was missing the data. Okay, split text columns. And if we say I want, for example, a colon followed by a space. Okay, it's worked again. Great. If it wasn't working, things you could do, if for example it thought that it was text, then you could do things like you might need to say equals, you might want to remove the pound sign, which you could do by using a substitute, which I put in case anyone needed it. A substitute function, say I want you to look in this cell, that's the first thing you need to tell it. I want you to look for pound signs, and I want you to substitute it with nothing. So we'll just put a space here. And that should give us, so that will give us number, but as you can see, it's still thinking of it as text, and either we tell it that it's actually a number, which didn't work, or if it really comes to it, we could paste it in, just the values, and then I suspect it will work as a number. Yeah. Okay, but thankfully we don't have to do any of that, but if you did run into that problem where when you split it, it ended up looking as like text with pound signs, and you wanted to fix all of that, that's how you could go about that. But we have this, and the question we have is, what's the percentage markup that they wanted on these goods? Okay, so this is quite straightforward because the markup is here, right? As in the difference. So the difference from 80 they paid. So we want to see what is this markup as a percentage of what they paid for it. So then we're simply going to say I want we want to know what this is over that, and we need to multiply the whole thing by 100. And so there we go. Let's remove these. Now I don't know why it's pushed left, because it's certainly a number. Equals this times 2. Yeah, it's quite strange. What happens if I do it in another cell? Okay, it's simple to do that column. So we'll get rid of those. So there's our answer, 74.99%. Let's get rid of those. And let's just check. Basically, we've got something, they pay £80 for it. They're going to add basically £60 on, and we're suggesting that's a 75% increase. Is £60 75% of £80? It is. So that works. And then if we drag this down the rest of the way, it'll work when we need it, and then it'll probably have a problem when we don't. So obviously it's not going to work here, but the ones we want are on the markup line. So we don't need that or that. Okay, so these are the percentages, and actually they show, I haven't looked at them in detail yet, but you can see very quickly that, for example, the markup here is 150%. So they're paying 80 for it, and they're going to sell it for 200. Here the markup is really quite substantial. They're paying 150 for it. They want to sell it for 480. And there's the markup as a percentage. Okay, and that's it. And then the final question, which I won't do because it's mostly going to involve getting the data, lining it up, and so on. So it would take some time, but roughly speaking, you'd be looking to get the data for GDP, for example, from all the countries or close to it involved in the Olympics. Line it up, probably ordering it by alphabetically, and then lining it up with your medals table, and then adjusting it essentially in the same way that we did with the pubs in Ireland and Wales, just to look at everything once it's been adjusted for population or for income. So those sheets I will leave in the drive if you want to go and work